Today we are in Unit 4, Day 4, and today we're going to be shifting gears a little bit and talking about the market revolution and how the economy changed here in the early United States and what exactly that looked like. I put there this picture from Cuyahoga National Park. Which is in Ohio, right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. I visited there before, and they had this poster up, which kind of shows the attitude that a lot of people had during that time. This is a quote from Daniel Webster, who says, "Let our age be the age of improvement." And you're going to see a lot of advancements in technology and in transportation and that kind of stuff during this time. There is a video here for you to watch from Crash Course about the market revolution, which he does a very, very good job of explaining it very, very quickly. So, two big changes that you are going to see during this time. One, the growth and mechanization of industry. So, you have the Industrial Revolution. It's already been happening over in Europe, and you're going to start to see the effects in the United States of that Industrial Revolution as well. You're also going to see the expansion and integration of markets, which is known as the Market Revolution. So, the markets for goods is going to expand, and you're going to see a lot of changes as far as the market goes, which I'll explain those to you and what exactly that means and what exactly that looks like. There is activity for you to do with colonial versus market economies, which has you comparing the two of those. And as we jump into this, we're going to see what did the vision of America, whose vision ultimately won of America, Jefferson or Hamilton. In Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia, he said, "Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people." And then he says, "Dependence begets subservience, and venality suffocates the germ of virtue and prepares fit tools for the designs of ambition." Again, Jefferson wanted farming as the future of America, and he did not like the idea of people having to be dependent upon somebody else for something. Like, he loved the idea of self-sufficiency and that if you needed food, you could make your own food. You didn't have to depend on somebody else for that, which I think there is something worthy to be praised in, being able to provide your own food and that kind of stuff. But to be honest, the vast majority of us do not do that these days. So just think about that as we go through this, about whose vision for America or the future of America really won in the end. So, as I said, you see the growth of transportation during this time. We mentioned this before, the growth of turnpikes, which were roads for wagons, canals, and railroads. Allowed people to sell their items throughout the land. So this is going to be very, very important because before this change, you're going to see generally markets were local. If you produced something, it stayed in a local market. You had very few companies that did something that went all over the United States, the Eastern Seaboard, which is basically what the United States still was. You'll see very few of that. So if you want to buy something, generally you had to get it local, or you'd have to travel to somewhere and buy that item if you really, really wanted it. Because of this change and growth of transportation, you're going to see items that were once considered luxury items now would be available on a wide scale, and a lot of people would be able to buy those things. Just think about it today, how much stuff that we have access to buying. You go to a grocery store, and there is a ton of stuff in the grocery store. You go to a Walmart or any type of store, you're going to see things that are coming from all over the world versus just being made local. So now things that are, again, once considered luxury items are available for the masses. Here's some pictures here. Again, I talked a little bit before in the past about canals and about the Kanawha Canal that ran through here. This is a picture of the Ohio and Erie Canal that went from Cleveland to Akron, Ohio. And you can see some of the remnants there. Again, this is in Cuyahoga National Park, which is outside of Cleveland, Ohio. They have some of the old locks set up there. And you can actually see some of the old locks from the Cuyahoga Canal up near Big Island here locally. All right, division of labor and a factory. So efficiency was increased through outwork and the division of labor. So you're going to start to see what division of labor means is that workers are going to be assigned specific tasks, and they're going to do that task over and over again. So essentially, we're coming up with what would eventually become the assembly line. Modern factories were created to concentrate production under one roof. And you're going to see that before this, a lot of times your production was scattered all over the place. Sometimes you'd actually have people do the work at home and then bring it into a certain place where it could be all put together. But now you're starting to see factories concentrated all together in one roof. So for example, the Cincinnati system of hog processing, the way they processed hogs previously is you would have one place that would kill the hog, another place that would butcher it, another place that would package it, and blah, 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 blah. With the Cincinnati system, everything happened under one roof. The killing of the hog, the butchering, and all that stuff happened under one roof. Again, it just makes the process much more efficient, which means that when it becomes more efficient, that you can lower prices and make things cheaper. Production advances during this time. You will see Oliver Evans, the automated flour mill driven by water power. So again, we've talked about the use of water power. Steam engines start being used to power mills. So you do see water power used for a period of years, but then there is a quick transition to steam engines. You start to see the early assembly line. One of the first people to really use an assembly line would be Samuel Colt in making his six-shooter in 1836. And again, of course, that will really be blown up and expanded in the late 20th century or late 19th century. The textile industry. You're going to see where this is going to be where there's a lot of innovation because people need clothes. And that's probably the most common thing that people were buying during this time and transitioning away from making their self. The British had dominated the textile industry, and they started to get worried when the United States started to industrially advance. So Britain started prohibiting the export of any of the machines or any of that type of thing anywhere else in the world except for Great Britain. They also did not allow the immigration of mechanics that could actually build the machines. So if British mechanics wanted to come to the United States, they would disguise themselves as ordinary laborers and come to the U.S. And again, they would come here because they saw a lot of opportunity here in the United States. Now, Samuel Slater, who's pictured there, he'd be known as the father of the American Industrial Revolution, and he would introduce some of the cotton spinning innovations to a cotton mill in Rhode Island, which is officially considered the start of the American Industrial Revolution in 1790. So you can see, despite what the British were trying, mechanics were still ending up here, and eventually that machinery would end up here as well. So when you're looking at the U.S. and Great Britain during this time, again, advantages. The United States, we had an abundance of natural resources. That's been one amazing thing about our country is that it is full of natural resources. We have lots of rivers for transportation and cotton and wool. 1816, the U.S. government began using tariffs for protectionist purposes, which again helps out industry here at home. Britain, because they had such a good sea power during the time, they were able to provide for very, very cheap transatlantic shipping and very low interest rates. And also they had cheap labor because they had a larger population compared to the United States at this time. Eventually we would outpace them with immigration and that kind of thing. Improved technology. So Americans would use two different strategies to compete with the British. One is that we would improve on British technology. So one thing Francis Cabot Lowell you would see do, he would actually go over, travel to Great Britain, he would tour the textile plants there, ask a lot of questions, and make detailed drawings, and then have those machines copied here in the United States by Paul Moody. So basically what they would call this today is like an industrial or corporate espionage. He was going and spying and getting as much information as he could so that he could copy that. Also, here in the United States, we found new and cheaper sources of labor. The Waltham Plan, which would be used in Lowell's factory, which would recruit young women from farms to work in the factories. Usually women would stay in a boarding house and had very, very strict rules. This was the part of the reason why he was actually able to get women to come work in these areas. Usually he would travel around. He might go to a farm where their family was there, and he'd say, hey, they can come work for me. And when they come work for me, they're going to have a very strict guidelines as far as rules, and then the family would allow the woman to go work there. So by the 1830s, you're going to see 40,000 women were working in textile mills in New England. The wages there were better than those of a house worker, and the living conditions were better than a farm house. So that's how you're going to see, again, another way that they were able to attract women to work in these factories. Women, though, often use their wages to pay off fathers' mortgages, to send their brothers to school, or to accumulate a dowry. You'll see that this is something that's still very, very common in the world today, not as much in the United States and as in Western Europe. But if you go over to Asian countries, this is still something that is very prevalent in those areas where you have women who go and work to help provide for the family and create a dowry and that kind of thing. A lot of women liked the freedom that they had that came with the mill work, but with any factory type work, you're going to see it's very monotonous, which a lot of them would not like. The factory owners like this system because they were able to undercut the British as far as prices go, because they weren't having to pay their workers as much. And you can see some pictures, some examples of some of the women that worked in these factories. Here it has a list of the regulations for the boarding house. I encourage you to read through those and then think about what you think life would be like if you had to live under these certain regulations there. Here is a song that was written during that time. Again, I encourage you to read through this, the idea of I cannot be a slave, written by one of the women working in these factories. All right, immigration. So you will see eventually the Lowell women get upset with the way that things were, and they go on strike. When they go on strike, they would be replaced with Irish immigrants during this time. So you're going to see that the strike did not work out too well for them because there were people to come in and take their place. And from 1840 to 1860, you're going to see millions of immigrants come in from Ireland, Germany, and Great Britain. They come here. Germans often go to the Midwest. You're going to see the Irish are the ones that usually stay in the cities, in the areas where you have factories at during this time. You will see the British would be the most successful, while the Irish were often kept in poverty when they came here. Now, with this immigration, of course, a lot of people were not too happy about immigration, and that would lead, especially when you have a lot of Irish Catholics coming here, that would lead to some anti-Catholic sentiment, such as Samuel Morse, the guy who did the Morse Code. He wrote Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States, and basically that whole pamphlet/book that he wrote was focusing on Catholics here and how they were a danger to our society. The entrepreneurial spirit. You're going to see during this time, you're going to have an explosion in technological innovation, and that would go throughout American manufacturing. You can see some examples there of all these different types of things that were done, including ways to make the British machines more efficient, and because of that, our machines were more efficient than theirs. Samuel Collins coming up with this way to make axe heads. Remington rifles, Singer sewing machines, Yale locks, all of these became household products. So again, remember, now products aren't just being local, but they are going all over the place. So Remington could make their rifle I think they made them in Connecticut. They could make those, and those could be sent throughout the colonies here. So again, big innovation here is products now aren't just being local. They can go nationwide. And you're going to see that with this also brings a changing society. Many Americans have developed what is known as the artisan Republican ethic based on the principle of liberty and equality. They saw themselves equal to one another and free to work for themselves. Now, you would lose some of that autonomy with the going to like a factory style model where you're kind of just a cog in a machine instead of being autonomous. Some men were very unhappy with their status of a wage status as a wage worker. Wage worker is what most people are today, where you go, you work for somebody, you work 5 hours, and they agree to pay you $10 an hour or whatever it might be. Now, you will see this kind of, remember, talking about master servant versus boss and hired hands. And some people begin to view it as almost like they were like a slave to the company that they were working with. And that's why you're going to see comparisons in the South when there's discussion of getting rid of slavery and about the evils of slavery. You're going to see a lot of people draw comparisons and say, well, look at people in the factories in the North. Yes, they have their freedom, but are they in any better condition than the slaves are down here? Well, for one, yes, they are, because they have their freedom. But there is some good parallels that you can draw there and say, working conditions not great in the North. Unions. Some wage workers would grew a very strong sense of identity and specialized skills, and that's when they start developing what would be known as a union. And this is where workers would band together to try to fight for and push for certain changes that they wanted to be made. For example, the 12-hour workday versus a 10-hour workday. Another thing with this is that you're going to see the artisan, which artisan, again, is someone specialized in a very specific task, such as a blacksmith. These jobs starting to be threatened due to industrialization. So you're going to see a lot of these artisans actually move to a smaller town where their skill would still be needed and where you're not going to have as much of that inundation of products coming from the cities where the factories were. Now, even though we mentioned unions here, you're going to see unions were very small during this time, did not have much power. Unions wouldn't really gain much power until later on. Strikes. Under law during that time, it was illegal for workers to organize themselves to push for higher wages. In the 1830s, you would have the Mutual Benefit Society formed to seek higher pay and national conditions. And in 1834, you'll see the National Trades Union formed. Again, they form these unions, but they don't have a lot of power because of the setup of laws in this country. And we'll see as we get closer to the end of the 19th century, a lot of times the government was more supportive of the companies because it was seen in the national interest to be more on the side of the companies. Now, market revolution, we've already mentioned this. Water became key to fast transportation via canals. That's why the Erie Canal and a lot of other canals were built. Later, you would have the steamboat used as well to help with that transportation. Railroads start to become very popular as you move into the 1850s because they were much faster and you didn't have some of the issues that you had with water. And again, mass production becomes very important. John Deere making his steel plow, he'd be one of the first ones to use mass production in creating that steel plow so that it could quickly be disseminated across the country. Now, of course, in the South still focused on cotton and slaves versus manufacturing that would happen in the North. You're going to see when we get to the Civil War, that's going to be one of the big disadvantages that the South is going to have because obviously as you're preparing for war, you want to be able to produce a lot of things, and the South didn't have the manufacturing capability that the North did because during this time, again, the South chose to stick with the system of slavery and focus on agriculture versus manufacturing goods. Cities and towns, again, cities and towns grew a lot during this period. Again, a lot of times you would have the factories located around there, and that is what would bring people to go there. Usually you're going to see the cities that grew the most happen to be they were somewhere where either they had a good harbor or they were near the fall line in a river. So, for example, here in Virginia, if you ever go to Richmond, Richmond is on the fall line of the James River. And what the fall line is that's the farthest up the river that you can bring a moderately sized ship up the river. If you go to Richmond and go to downtown Richmond and you look at the James River there, you're going to notice that it is full of just rocks and all kinds of stuff like that. So you can't bring a ship any farther up that or you're going to hit all those rocks and sink. By 1860, again, the largest cities, New York, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Chicago, while the old Atlantic seaport cities still were very, very vital as well. So again, you're going to have an explosion of cities. Most of these cities that are going to grow the most are going to be in the North. What did the social structure look like? You'd have the business elite in large cities. You'd see the richest 1% owned 40% of property, many stocks and bonds. The government taxed that property, but rarely taxed stocks, bonds, and inheritance. The middle class, you would see that their per capita income would rise quite a bit from 1830 to 1857, and the idea of the self-made man became very popular. And that's still something that you could say is very popular in American culture this day. This idea that you can start from nothing and through hard work, you can become one of these richest 1%, the business elite that we are talking about. The bottom, you would have the urban workers and the poor. This would be the bottom 10% of the labor force. These are people that often worked very dangerous jobs, owned very little property. For example, like your Irish immigrants that are coming in and others. Often in this urban workers and the poor, this is when the whole family would work, including the children. Some parents would turn to alcoholism to kind of deal with life during that time. But yeah, at the bottom, again, usually for them, the whole family would work and you wouldn't have anybody staying home. Now, the benevolent empire. We just mentioned that some families, poor families, that people turn to alcoholism. And the benevolent empire, their goal was to target drunkenness and other social issues of the day. So these groups encourage people to live well-disciplined lives and created institutions to help with that. Usually upper class women are going to be the major ones behind this and helping through these charitable organizations. The business elite would help establish savings banks and Sunday schools for the poor. And you're going to see, this is when you're going to see the start of the temperance movement here in the country, which is the movement to get rid of alcohol as a country. And you can see there some of the posters there from the time. Drinking leads to neglect of duty, moral degradation, and crime. So people were seeing these increasing rates of alcoholism and saying, hey, how can we go about tackling this? And often, again, they went through the church, and often these were led by women within the church. All right, you'll have some primary sources to look at there, but again, in the end of this, just know that the big changes during this time is you see this big transition happening in our economy. Instead of being more locally focused, it's going to be more on a broad scale as you start to see mass production and things being sent and shipped all over the country. Again, not just due to an improvement in factories, but due to how good the transportation systems were here as far as water transportation and then later transitioning to the railroad. So hope you learned something today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.